U.S. President Joe Biden has defended Israel's raid on Gaza's largest hospital. He's repeated Israeli statements that Hamas had its headquarters beneath al-Shifa, but neither Israel nor the U.S. has provided evidence to back up the claims.
Here's the situation. You have a circumstance where the first war crime is being committed by Hamas by having their headquarters, their military, hidden under a hospital. And that's a fact. That's what's happened. Israel did not go in with a large number of troops, did not raid, did not rush everything down. They've gone in, and they've gone in with their soldiers carrying weapons, their guns. They were told, let me be precise. We've discussed the need for them to be incredibly careful.
From Washington, D.C., Mike Hanna has more.
He repeated the Israeli narrative about the presence of Hamas fighters in the al-Shifa Hospital. He also gave a version of events which mirrored that of the Israeli forces in talking about how they entered and operated within the confines of the hospital. But at the same time, President Biden continued to insist that there has to be some thought about what happens after this conflict ends, once again repeating the mantra of him and his administration that that has to be done within the context of a two-state solution. Other points of possible criticism of Israel and its Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, President Biden making very clear that Israel should not think about occupying and maintaining control in Gaza, saying that this is something that shouldn't happen at all. He also repeated his administration's position that in the operations, Israeli forces have got to take the utmost care to protect the lives of civilians who get caught up in this ongoing conflict, as he puts it. So President Biden having a lot to say about that conflict in Gaza. Most importantly, though, continuing to try and put it within a wider context, that this is a current conflict involving Hamas, but the only way in which there is going to be some kind of lasting conclusion to the ongoing conflict is within the context of a two-state solution. Mike Hanna, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Joining us on set again is Khaled Beydoun. He's a law professor at Arizona State University and a specialist on national security. Thank you for joining us on the program again. Do you think the forcefulness that we are seeing of Biden's defense of the Israeli military is out of step with recent remarks by senior U.S. officials who are now talking more about the humanitarian situation in Gaza?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a strategic doublespeak, if you will, where Biden is sort of like sinking his feet, kind of like demonstrating his full-fledged allegiance to the Zionist objective to expand its territory in Gaza. People like Blinken are talking about humanitarian pauses. But what, in essence, are humanitarian pauses? They rhetorically sound good, but in essence, they're functional sort of inroads and devices that fall in line with what Israel wants to do in terms of accelerating its land grabs in the north of Gaza, but also the south.
Domestically, though, recent polls are showing that domestic support for this war, Israel's war on Gaza, is garnering less support. And it is, of course, an election year for Biden next year. So at what point does it really become a problem for him?
I think it's already a problem for him, right? I think that the favorability polls that are broad, the ones that are tied to specific demographics, not only demonstrate a decline, but demonstrate a really serious plummet. And the Biden administration, even before this crisis, was not, on good feet. It was.
But does he not care about that then?
I think he does. I think he cares about it. I think a lot of it is sort of the real politic of the neoliberal Democratic Party being extremely wed to the Zionist objective, clashing with the more domestic, political interests. But yeah, I don't think that he understands just how much of a folly him sinking his feet so deep into this crisis is going to create for him.
Today is day 41 of this war, making this now officially the longest Israeli military operation in Gaza. When you look at the images on the screen, when you look at the sheer number of people that have been killed, the suffering of babies, how do you think history is going to look back on this war?
I think miserably, and I think tying this back to the question of Biden, I think, beyond his sort of political investment in the war, I think the rhetoric is also very insensitive, right? The fact that he's minimizing the numbers, the fact that he's...
Doesn't believe the numbers.
Doesn't believe the numbers, exactly, is sort of echoing the categorical collective indictment of the Palestinian people. Some of the, the quasi-slurs, things like collateral damage. I think it's going to be remembered very bleakly. And I think one of the positive developments in the United States where I live is a new host of American demographics are labeling this ethnic cleansing, are labeling this a genocide. And there's a real fissure with how the Biden administration perceives and frames it, with how people on the ground not only will remember it, I think, years from now, but are addressing it and framing it right now.
And what about Arab countries? How's history going to look back at the Arab countries and how they have dealt with this crisis?
A full-fledged indictment, across the region. The fact that, Arab countries have, again, not only been complicit, but in many respects, in the shadows, behind closed doors, have really advanced and, facilitated what Israel is doing in Gaza. But again, I think that there's this popular public idea that the Arab world is united and, nation states are somehow politically wed and committed to one another, which I think needs to be demystified. I think that needs to be, interrogated and critiqued, that, Arab governments, especially those that are more affluent and wealthy in nature, are really just, kind of looking out for their economic and political interests.
Yesterday, we heard from Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president. We don't hear from him often, well, we haven't over the last couple of weeks, but he did give his strongest condemnation yet of what is happening in Gaza. There's been plenty of criticism of him and the Palestinian Authority in the lead up to this war. What role do you see the Palestinian Authority playing in its current form as we go into the future? A
very token role, to be honest with you. I mean, you can look at what's happening in the West Bank. With the acceleration of settlements, the midnight arrests, the really draconian policies that are being enacted over there, which again are a referendum on the PA not being, really being obsolete essentially politically. And there was mention or a proposal that the PA would take over governance of Gaza after ceasefire, and that was categorically dismissed by Netanyahu. So I think what we're seeing now, beyond the silence of Abbas, but also, kind of the growing obsolescence of the PA, both in the West Bank and in the future of Gaza, effectively indicting them kind of as a token political shell, and even more than that, a proxy for what Israel wants to do in the West Bank, but even further down the line in Gaza.
Khaled Beydoun, really good to talk to you, law professor of Arizona State University.
Thank you.
Well, after 4 failed attempts, the UN Security Council has adopted a resolution calling for urgent pauses in fighting in Gaza and humanitarian corridors in order to allow in aid. Nearly 6 weeks into Israel's bombing of the Strip, diplomats were able to find common ground by focusing on Palestinian children. Kristen Salumi has more.
Good afternoon. The Russian and the U.S. ambassador walked into the meeting together, foreshadowing the Security Council's first action on the war in Gaza. While both raised their hands to abstain on the vote, their agreement stopped there. The council passed a resolution focused on children, calling for humanitarian pauses of unspecified but sufficient duration to get aid to Gaza and the immediate release of all being held captive. Russia said it was too little too late and called for stronger language.
Our amendment calling for a humanitarian truce is consistently along the lines of the stated aim of the authors of the text, to preserve its purely humanitarian nature. This is the lowest common denominator, lower than which the Council simply cannot allow itself to fall.
Palestine also said the resolution didn't go far enough.
I should even say you have been demanding from Israel to respect international law for decades, and it has dismissed your calls and continued its crimes against the Palestinian people. Did you ever hold it accountable? Are you going to hold it accountable for rejecting your resolution you adopted this afternoon?
The U.S. ambassador bemoaned the fact that it took so long for the council to act, failing to mention that she vetoed an identical resolution 4 weeks ago. It had the same omissions, it had the same call for a humanitarian pause. Why wait until 4,000 children were dead?
This was a resolution that specifically addressed the humanitarian needs. The other resolutions did not. Those other resolutions were political resolutions. And as I said, this resolution is a huge step forward.
The UN wasn't waiting for the Security Council to deliver its aid to Gaza. It's been negotiating with Israel directly on a daily basis for expanded access, and its officials calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. Now, if Israel fails to comply, it will be in violation of the resolution as well as international humanitarian law. Kristen Salumi, Al Jazeera, the United Nations.
More raids have been carried out in the occupied West Bank. Israeli army units stormed the outskirts of Al-Farah camp in the north and arrested several Palestinians. Let's get the latest from Zain Basravi, who's in Ramallah. Bring us up to date, Zain.
Well, I'll start by telling you about a raid and clashes that are still ongoing. In Al-Mughayr, east of Ramallah, dozens of Palestinians have been detained as Israeli forces go from house to house. Witnesses saying that they've turned it into a kind of military base. And soldiers have been seen raising Israeli flags over Palestinian homes. And that happening in Al-Mughayr as we speak. Those raids are currently ongoing. Overnight, we saw reports of 60 Palestinians being detained in raids all over the occupied West Bank. Early this morning, northeast of Ramallah and Tubas, Israeli forces raided and there were armed clashes with Palestinian fighters there at Al-Farah refugee camp. Those clashes, that raid, now over. There's been another arrest raid being carried out in Husan, west of Bethlehem, and in Jenin, in Kufr Dan, near Jenin. 2 homes have been surveyed, homes of 2 Palestinians that were detained back in August. And whenever Israeli forces survey a home, that is a prelude to that home being demolished. Again, this home belonging to 2 Palestinians that were detained by Israeli forces and remain in detention since August. 3 other people were detained. 3 brothers were detained in a village near Jenin. And this is the 3rd time that this family has been detained. Israeli forces trying to bring pressure to bear on another brother that they are pursuing to try and arrest. So these cases of a kind of collective punishment, pressuring certain family members to have another person surrender themselves to Israeli forces, these kinds of indignities continuing in the occupied West Bank.
OK, thank you for that. Zain Basravi there for us in Ramallah. Members of South Africa's parliament are expected to debate a motion to cut diplomatic ties with Israel. South Africa has already recalled its diplomats from Israel in condemnation of the war in Gaza. Famida Miller has more.
As the war on Gaza continues, South Africans have held dozens of protests, prayer meetings and pickets. Some in support of Israel, others like this one in Cape Town calling for a ceasefire and end to the genocide. However, the protest quickly descended into chaos as police fired water cannon and stun grenades. Some blame tensions between opposing groups, while others hold the police responsible.
They could have de-escalated the situation much more professionally, even if there was agitation on both sides, and we say, and there was, which there was, and we say even the law enforcement only added to escalate the situation.
While South Africa's government supports a 2-state solution, President Cyril Ramaphosa has warned of Israel committing genocide. South Africa has in recent days recalled all its diplomats from Israel, which many within or supporting the Jewish community say is concerning.
There have been incidents that you find of boycotts of Jewish businesses and these sorts of things, and I think that makes the community feel very uncomfortable.
We can't have a government that is choosing side. We did this thing called non-aligned with Russia. But why is it that on Israel we become ideological and we become radical on this issue? Christians in this country stand and support Israel.
As the war continues, so do the demonstrations. This one led by school children.
We have a moral responsibility to actually show them that we need to fight for something, especially in a country that has seen apartheid.
We want to spread awareness as much as we can with the genocide that is taking place. Thousands of people have lost their lives.
Opposition party, the Economic Freedom Fighters, wants the government to cut diplomatic and economic ties with Israel. It's put forward a motion for that to be debated in Parliament. A debate that, while the governing African National Congress may support, is likely to see divisions within Parliament too. Rita Miller, Al Jazeera.